Welcome to an English edition of Intersection with Adrian Gita. I'm Adrian, your host, and today we would like to take a look on the literature and scientific researches on the issue of sexuality, of sexual orientation, of gender dysphoria, what gender is, and why we have so many conflicting ideas on any side of the spectrum you look at. The general population perception, which has been built and fed by the media, is that sexual orientation is an innate characteristic, that we are born that way. You have heard probably phrases like, I'm a girl that's locked in a boy's body. I'm a boy that's locked in a girl's body. And this is the idea that has been presented by the gay activists, the gay rights activists. We're going to talk about the history of that. What I would like to disclose from the beginning is that this discussion is a popular discussion, is not a scientific study in itself. We just take in consideration the scientific studies of others, what they found. And it's not about gay rights. We're not dwelling on any individual right per se, because this is not my intention. I believe in individual rights, and when two consenting adults do whatever they want behind the closed door of their bedroom, there is nobody's business, so not mine either. We're not talking about rights. We're talking about issues that are being presented in a distorted way to the public, so that a certain ideology is fed to the public. And this ideology started way back in the 60s and the 70s by the feminist movement, which of course tried to empower women, the role of women in society, and is based on a reaction towards the traditionalistic views of paternal influence, of the role of males in society. And of course, the feminist movement may have done good things for the women, but what happened is that before 1950s, before this movement, the idea of gender was not associated with people. Gender, coming from the Latin languages, was a term defining things in literature, in grammar. It pertained to certain nouns, feminine or masculine nouns. It did not refer to people. The change from that perception of gender to a perception of gender as being applied to humans has been a process starting after the 50s, 60s by this movement and by the so-called sexologists, those who promoted sex changes for people who wanted to have sex changes. And the idea that this capacity or inclination or sexual practices are inborn, that we are born that way, the gay would say, it's a way to justify their interventions with the sex therapies and sex, I mean, not sex therapies, sex operations, sex surgeries. But studies which used to be showed as proof of biological determination for sexual orientation, starting even from 1958, from 70s, from 91, 93 especially, we're going to talk about the study, has been presented to the public as being proofs that there is a biological basis for homosexuality. And this is called the gay gene. Well, further studies later on show that there is not a gay gene anywhere to be found, even though the sexuality is a complex issue and is is rooted into maybe biological, but more surely and on a broader measure on the environmental influences. We're gonna mention this in the talk that we're having. So for this discussion, which is like I said, a popular discussion, I'm having it with my son Andre from Chicago. We're gonna dwell on the biological reasons or lack thereof for the concept of we are born this way. And after we touch on that issue, we are going to really talk a little more about dysphoria, gender dysphoria, and especially gender dysphoria in children. Because today's trends in education, I'm talking about public school, is that even from the kindergarten, children are told that their gender is what they decided to be, that gender has nothing to do with their sex, and the children come home pretty confused. Mommy, am I a boy? Am I a girl? Am I going to be changing later on into this or into that? So there is a lot of confusion based on this ideology. So this time I'd like to say welcome to Andre. Andre, I'm happy you have the time, even this end of the year, New Year, would offer you better opportunities to do something else with your time. But I thank you for being here today. Welcome.
Thanks, Dad. It's good to be here. I don't have any other plans for New Year's, so spending it with you.
Okay. When I called you last week to ask you whether you'd be willing to have this discussion, I gave you a kind of a task. I said, look, the main study, of course, there have been other studies, and we'll mention those, but one of the pivotal points is a study in 1993, I guess, that talked about a gene for gay, a gay gene, but always in all literature, this is put in brackets, it's so-called gay gene. And it's about Q28, a gene or a formation of nucleotides on the X chromosome. Tell me, what did you find out about this experiment, and what does it show or not show?
From what I read about this study, it was a very limited sample that was chosen for the study. I think they had maybe 30 or 40 individuals that they looked at. And it's not necessarily a gene marker, it's just a location on the X chromosome that's identified by that term, XQ28. So it's not an actual gene. They just decided to call it that so that they know where it is on the chromosome. But the results was itself inconclusive in the sense that their hypothesis says that because this gene is found in the population that they looked at, which is homosexual, they concluded that there is a biological inheritance from the mother's side, so on the maternal line, that serves to determine whether these individuals become homosexual or not. And while you can make that argument, just because one location of a gene or of a chromosome is associated with a certain characteristic doesn't mean that that gene causes that characteristic. It could be the other way around. It could be that the characteristic, the behavior, activates a certain region of the chromosome to produce certain proteins, certain genes, and the behavior drives the genetic expression. But they interpret it as this marker is common in these homosexuals. Therefore, we conclude that this gene causes homosexuality, basically.
Let me ask you this. As we know it happens in science. Experiments need to be reproduced, and the results have to be similar, very close. And what I have found is that there was no duplication of this 1993 experiment. And one of the contentions was that even the experiment itself was skewed, because even the main researcher was a gay person. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so I think his name is Hamer. He is an openly gay activist, even though he worked at the National Institutes of Health. So he's basically the lead on this study. He is an openly gay activist. So the entire basis, the entire premise of his study is hopefully to prove that there's a genetic predisposition to him being gay and other people like him to be gay. In other words, it's not their fault in a way, and they can't help it. But you're right. I think there were one or two studies that were attempted in order to reproduce this particular study, and both of them failed to show any conclusive link between that marker, that region of the X chromosome, with homosexuality. In other words, with that marker causing homosexuality. So two other studies basically debunked Mr. Hamer's 1993 study. And
there are more studies that I like you to mention or to talk about. One is as recent as this year or 2016. I'm not sure, but I think this year I've read on some, I think on Telegram. So quite a number of them were twin studies show one is gay and one is not. If it was a biological determinant, a certain gene, wouldn't have to be 100%.
Of course.
One is gay, the other one has to be gay because it's biologically determined. How do you see that?
That's what you would conclude. I mean, if the genetic information determines your sexual orientation and you have no choice, then yeah, if your twin is gay, then you're likely to be gay too. And the fact that the study shows that it was usually the younger brother of the twin, and I mean younger by a couple of minutes or whatever the age difference is, because they're not exactly born at the exact same instant. But the slightly younger brother is the gay one more often than not, and their study basically says that this is caused by the surrounding factors, the atmosphere, the environment at home, the interaction between the older sibling and his friends, and the younger one feeling left out or not as masculine, or there are other factors that determine him to be gay, and it's nothing to do with genetics because they both share the exact same genes. So again, this pretty much blows it out of the water that if you are gay, it's because of your genes, because it's clearly not. It's more behavioral, environmental, upbringing, educational, societal pressures, interactions that more likely determine someone to be gay or not.
In 1991, prior to this, 2 years before this study, there was another study, and also led by the lead researcher was a gay person who tried to argue that there are differences in the brain structure of homosexuals compared to heterosexuals. And that study also was understood or presented to the media as another proof that, look, the brain is different in those people. And That study also has been debunked in the way that the research, I don't know if you heard of it, DeVray or something, maybe you can correct me on that. Um, that study actually was conducted on a specimen of homosexuals that he selected from a prison or from a detention center. These people all were there for various reasons, but one characteristic was they all died from AIDS,
Mhm.
and there was no control group to do the study. And later studies show that neuroplasticity is a very real issue. The behavior, actually, the behaviors generally influence even the brain development. What can
Of
you
course, that's
tell?
not a new finding. I mean, we've known this for decades. Alcoholics, addicts, drug addicts, their brain structures differs from the normal individual because those pleasure centers in the brain, those addiction centers in the brain, are overly used, overly developed, basically. And you can tell. You can do an MRI scan, and you can tell um, the areas of the brain that are different and potentially damaged. You can tell what kind of drugs those receptors are used to receiving, and you can tell a lot about the brain's function based on these type of studies. But again, that doesn't do anything to prove that um, the brain structure causes something. It's the exact other way around. The brain becomes that way because of what it has to deal with. And when you count all the psychosocial factors and all the behavioral factors that homosexuals have to deal with, because they don't feel accepted openly by and large in society. The rate of depression is very high. The rate of alcoholism is very high, especially among this subset of people. And this takes a physical toll on the brain and on brain function. And you can see it.
If you allow me, indeed, there is a hypothesis talking about the so-called social stress as being the cause for these conditions. But that's not proven. Actually, from what I've read, this population, whether they are gay, lesbians, bisexuals, even those with the gender identity disorder, right now it's called gender dysphoria,
Mhm.
they are at a much higher rate of risk for health problems, not necessarily for the blame or the shame or whatever they encounter from the general population, but because of the condition they are in. In other words, psychiatrists point to some deficiencies in their psyche that has direct correlation to their lifestyles or whatever they do, because it's proven that much higher, 2-3 times higher, even to up to 20% higher rates for suicide, for depression, for anxiety disorder, for inability to correlate, to cooperate and to function in society,
Mhm.
which probably have to do with some serious issues internally in their brain and in their psyche. And just to say that they suffer all these because of how they are perceived, or
Oh no,
how, I don't think it's an accurate view.
no. And I didn't mean to imply that. I mean, it's not just their reaction to being perceived gay. It's the direct consequences of that behavior takes that toll on their brain function, on their bodily functions too. And one interesting thing is um, there are consequences to being gay in the sense that the American Red Cross won't accept blood donations from the gay population, and that's just the rule that they have, and they've had it for 20 or 30 years. And the gay community have tried hard lobbying to remove that ban on blood donations from the gay community. So not only do they face a social stigma because of their lifestyle, but they're kind of also caught between two worlds. They're caught between thinking that they're born this way and they have no choice, or it's a genetic disposition, inheritance, a type of illness, if you will, that could be treated with gene therapy and hormone therapy and other things. So they're caught between, am I born this way or do I want to stay this way? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't say that nature made me this way, but then when we have the medical tools and the knowledge and the therapies to potentially cure that or to treat that, you opt out because no, that's just who I am. That's who I identify as. Well, what you identify as has nothing to do with what you are in real life and from a biological standpoint. So that's where I think that much more attention should be paid to their mental health. They should seek treatment, and they should be offered a variety of treatment from a mental health standpoint, much more so than from having the opportunity and the flexibility to have all these surgeries and sex changes offered, paid by insurance, even paid for by the military. Basically, I mean, this entire issue goes as high as people signing up for the military because they will pay for your sex change operation.
I wanted to bring a last thought into this discussion about the gays and I'm born this way that I've read on the gay sites. I mean, I visited gay and lesbians and called LGBT. Now it's LGBTQ, but it's not just Q. There are so many other letters. They identified over 50 type of identities in this gender issue, which is crazy. I think they run out of letters. They started to put digits and then I don't know what. But on their sites, I read and some blogs, they say, you know what? We've been trying. Well, I don't know why you guys, the scientists, I don't know why you try so hard to find a gay gene. After all, what do you want? Do you want to cure us? Do you don't think? I mean, are you saying that we have a problem? Just leave us alone. Let us be, and that's it. Don't no more gay studies. And actually, if I understand correctly, the National Institute of Health has not been granted funds for the gay gene for a long time, or it's not a priority in the research community nowadays. Am I wrong on this?
No, it's not a priority, and honestly, it should never have been a priority. I mean, this guy who did the study in '93, Mr. Hamer, he lobbied hard to get a department of lesbian and gay studies opened up within the National Institutes of Health. That's how much he thought this issue merited scientific inquiry. Read that as spending money for this type of research, and he was shot down, and he was actually even removed from his existing post.
After a lot of other researchers came on board and said, no, that result is skewed, is not right, is not reproducible. The study itself, even though it was presented, very much presented on the media as it is a proof, the scientists said, no, it's not a proof. We cannot stay on that idea. And the National Institute of Health say, you know what? He moved it from, he was actually in the National Cancer, but it's part of probably national health.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I don't want to dwell too much on the gay lesbian issues because, of course, it's related. The idea of I'm born this way goes at the core of the ideology that now is promoted in schools through the public education. So most of the public education is driven by the left ideology, and even the gender identity, which is a misconstrued and forced concept on us, as if until 1950s we didn't know what we are, male or female, as if our biology is not good enough to show us that we are male or female. Well, once they switched the term, they brought the gender from the grammar, they put it over the people. Now we have gender dysphorias. We have, well, I want to remind me about something. In the Association of, or American Psychiatric Association, they issue that DSM manual, which is Diagnostics and Statistics Manual for Mental Disorders. Well, now they are at fifth edition, which is
Yeah.
since 2013. But if you look at the language used by the DSM manual, in the DSM manual, you can note, it's obvious that the pressures from the left with this the mediatization and all the propaganda, if I can use that word, even though I'm not using in a pejorative sense, but with a large coverage in media, uh, they felt the American Psychiatric Association, they felt pressured to change views. For instance, homosexuality in the DSM-1 was a mental disorder. In DSM-2, I think from the 72, we have the DSM-2, they took it out. Other changes occur in DSM-3 and 4 as far as what is gender identity disorder. It was still a disorder, it was still a sickness, it was still covered by insurance to be treated. Well, in the DSM-5, which is from 2013, the gender identity disorder has been changed into gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria is not considered a sickness unless it impairs your ability to socialize, to have
Function.
normal relationship, to function in society. And by the way, we have on one side this agenda of blaming the conservatives for their views, and it's based on the Bible. They use the Bible as a tool. They misinterpret the Bible, and they say, look, pedophilia, it's in your churches. And I'm not saying it's not, in the sense that there are very, very isolated cases, but even pedophilia was considered a sickness. Now it's not, because they changed the name in the DSM-5. They said, no, pedophilia is part of paraphilia. Paraphilia meaning all these type of various behaviors, but pedophilia is not the same as pedophilic disorder. You see, pedophilia, it's a condition, but pedophilic disorder, it's only when you act on that desire to have sex with children. And I visited blogs of pedophiles. Some of them pretend that they support the idea of not interfering with actually with children, but they say openly, I would love to. This is my desire. I would love to have sex with children, but here I am, poor me. I cannot do it because of so many constraints. But that's very bad. I feel it, but if I'm not acting on it, I'm not a pedophile. And I think it's an exaggerated view. If you think that way, if you really are attracted sexually to a 10-year-old boy or girl, you are really in a category of being distorted somehow in your thinking. This is my personal view. I'm not.
And most normal people would agree with you. And the vast majority of people that are somewhat critically capable of thinking would say that, why is this even a discussion? Why is this even an issue that we have to address. I know that in some cultures it's common for, you know, a fully grown adult male to have a child bride, but you know, as far as Western civilization goes, there's a certain age of consent that we enforce, and I know it varies by state, but still, there's a certain age, somewhere in the teens at least, that is required for consent to be given before any
Yeah,
kind of relationship can be had.
yeah,
Now,
but here's the point with this age of consent thing. It's a two-edged sword. In one instance, they say the Christians, the one who are obsessed with having sex with children, the pedophiles of the religious orientation, they lower the age more and more. Look at the belt, whatever Bible Belt states in the south of the United States. Their age of consent as early as 13 and so on. But on the other hand, the other party, the pedophiles, who are not at all on the Christian or on the religious bandwagon, they want to lower the age of sexual consent because they want to have sex with children. They even express their desire openly, and they are still okay in the sense that they are not considered mentally ill. But it's a push from both directions in this idea of
in general,
consent.
what I've noticed is that the left collectively uh, points fingers at other people and accuses them of exactly what the left itself is doing, actively doing. So whereas they point to, you know, religious bigots or religious fundamentals who are perhaps engaging in some of these activities, whether they're, you know, Mormon or um, Islam, you know, and we point to them and say, see, you guys are the problem. It's not us. It's actually the other way around, because if they had it their way, they would be able to engage in these activities with toddlers, with little kids. We're not talking teenagers. We're talking, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids. And just because they're not able to carry out their intentions, their desires, doesn't mean that they're not pedophiles, because many of them have been arrested for child pornography. So just because you don't engage in the activity itself doesn't mean you're not a pedophile. You know, they get their fix somehow.
There is
And a
no
lot of these
guarantee
people are
they will
busted.
not. There is no guarantee they will not act on it.
Of course,
That's the problem.
there's
They
never
say
a guarantee.
in the manual, in the DSM-5, well, they're not. They do not have a pedophilic disorder if they do not act on their desires.
That's
But
completely wrong.
there is no proof. How do you guarantee they will never act on their desires?
There is no guarantee. I mean, once someone has expressed his desire, there is no way that he or she will always be able to fight it off. If this is without treatment. So if this is something that someone is fighting with on a daily basis and not seeking treatment, they are a ticking time bomb. And there's really no other way to put it. If you don't seek treatment for these intentions and you want to think yourself normal, 99% of society will disagree with you and will ask you to go to a therapist. And it might be a long time that you spend in therapy before you are considered safe. Because if you act out on those impulses, you will be a registered sex offender for the rest of your life. So they know the consequences. And that's why they're pushing so hard for the legal protections to say this is not a mental disorder. This is normal. This is who I am. Because they fear the repercussions, the consequences, legal consequences of what could happen if they get caught. So the movement is to subvert the legalities of it and make it okay.
Andre, let's move to another topic, at least for a few minutes, because I think this is the most important point that I want to make today. Um, that is about the education of our children in public schools. The way that the ideology leads to changes in curricula, and how children are being misled. Uh, they are becoming more and more confused about their identity, not just gender, but even sexual identity, as if all of a sudden we don't know what we are as human beings. And I want to quote a few things um, that have to do with these changes and ideology. And in this article, Gender Dysphoria in Children from the American College of Pediatricians, June 2017, it is shown that prior to 50s, gender applied only to grammar, not to persons. This changed during the 1950s and 60s as sexologists realized that their sex reassignment agenda could not be sufficiently defended using the words sex and transsexual. From a purely scientific point, human beings possess a biologically determined sex and innate sex differences. No sexologist could actually change a person's genes through hormones and surgery. Sex change is objectively impossible. Their solution was to hijack the word gender and infuse it with a new meaning that applied to persons. John Money, PhD, was among the most prominent of these sexologists who redefined gender to mean the social performance indicative of an internal sex identity. Internal sex identity is a new word. In essence, this sexologist invented the ideological foundation necessary to justify their treatment of transsexualism with sex reassignment surgery and called it gender. It is this man-made ideology of an internal sex identity that now dominates mainstream medicine, psychiatry, and academia. This linguistic history makes it clear that gender is not and never has been a biological or scientific entity. Rather, gender is a socially and politically constructed concept. Um, have you noticed the actual trend in the education? I don't know if you, in your line of work, have found any mentions of it, and what do you think it could be done? The ideology is what it is. It's been implemented in the last 30, 40 years. And where are these children going to head in the future as they mature? Because scientists prove that even if a child at the very early stages of development might have some confused ideas whether he's a boy or girl, he can play with this kind of toy, that kind of toy, whatever. Normally, in 90 some percent of the cases, over 90%, 98, I guess, 97, they turn okay. By the time they reach into later puberty and adolescence, before they mature, or by the time they mature, this goes away. This gender dysphoria, which is called, used to be gender identity disorder, which is a mental illness. But now the education starting from kindergarten is feeding on this. In other words, they are making things confused by the way they educate them, telling kids in kindergarten they can be anything they want. They present them books like with the stories of Bono, who now is a famous guy, used to be a woman, was born a woman, and other stories that parents don't even know. This transgender or gender issues education in schools, it's done without the parents' consent, without parents' knowledge. And there's a difference. While the sexual education has to be approved by parents through negotiations, through knowledge of parents, This gender ideology is presented to kids, which is more dangerous than the sexual education. Sexual education is very needed, in general term, talking about education. But gender education is done in schools at very early ages without even parents knowing, and they just find out. The girl comes home crying, and what's the matter, mommy? Well, mommy, am I going to be a girl or a boy? Am I going to transform into a boy later on? They're confused because of that. Why don't we speak more aggressively, as some of the scientists are doing, to say this is wrong, this needs to be stopped? What do you think?
Because we didn't do it soon enough. We allowed the liberal mindset to dominate policies that affect kids without thinking through what the consequences will be. We, in our efforts to be tolerant to this phenomenon of transgenderism, first we legitimized it by accepting it as a reality, as if you can be a different gender, because we allowed our slick tongue. If we would have stopped it at the level of the gender confusion issue, maybe it wouldn't have gotten to be where it is now. It's unstoppable now in terms of society's and the media's glorification of it. You've got kids in kindergarten and first and second grade that are on their phones all day long. And they have access to the internet. They are on Instagram. They're on Facebook. They are bombarded daily by media promoting this transgender change, how cool it is, and how, their heroes are now, they used to be boys, they turn into girls, and if they can do it, so can you. And the parents don't have control over what the kid is learning. The parents are busy working. The kid comes home, turns on the TV, sees more of the same thing. The parents would rather let the kid interact with the TV rather than them teach the kid what is a boy, what is a girl. Well, think about how much influence a parent has over their young child, and then think about the effects that a gay couple who adopts kids, they're now legally able to. What type of values do they instill in those kids? That it's okay to be gay, that it's normal to be gay, that it's okay to role play. If you're a boy, you can be a girl. Or, this under the name of freedom, right? You can be anything you want to be. They basically teach their kids, or they can teach their kids, to divorce completely from reality. You don't have to be what you're born as. You can be whatever you want to be. And it's true that once a society, starting with the youngest, are polluted or infected with this type of mentality, this ideology, society itself crumbles. I mean, history is full of civilizations that have given freedom to this type of movement, and they fell as a result. I mean, this type of moral decay, because that's what it is. You don't even have to address it necessarily only from a scientific and biological perspective. These things are nature itself has some innate morals. You need male and female to procreate and continue the species. There are no gays and lesbians that procreate to continue the species. And if they do, it's with the help of technology and science. And you can rest assured that they're going to instill their values into that offspring, which is not going to be considered normal by and large. And if they become society, if they become the majority, then I think Western civilization and the Judeo-Christian Western civilization as we know it is on its death throes, really.
What these pediatricians highlight in this article, these are professionals, they highlight some of the risks of this agonist of the gonadotropin, how you call this? Let me see. Gonadotropin release hormone to that
GRH, yeah.
GnRH, because when they use this type of hormonal treatment to annul or to postpone the transition in the puberty time and puberty years, this is detrimental for their health. And they use leprolide and hysterine, and these agonists, what these pediatricians say, these agonists arrest bone growth, decrease bone accretion, prevent the sex steroid-dependent organization and maturation of the adolescent brain, and inhibit fertility by preventing the development of gonadal tissue and mature gametes for the duration of treatment. So the implication of using this hormonal therapy are not, I mean, much good. They go beyond just the gene identity issue they try to fix. It's not just that. They affect negatively other stuff like bone formation.
Of course. And if you think about a lot of these treatments end up sterilizing these kids. And just the fact that it affects brain formation, I mean, that should be a waving red flag. Don't do this, you know? The fact that it can affect the way the brain's neural network forms, because during puberty, there are the effects of the hormones, and the hormones themselves are released by the brain in response to various factors, right? So by taking these drugs, you're basically inhibiting the normal release of these things, the normal production of and secretion of these hormones. You are instead stopping that process, and you're injecting opposite type of hormones for the opposite sex, because that's what the kid thinks he wants to be. And you as a physician, you know this is harmful and detrimental to the patient. You know this is wrong in the sense of first doing no harm, the Hippocratic Oath. You know this is wrong, but you say that the happiness of your patient is what's important, not their medical health, but their happiness, their perceived happiness with who they are. That's what's more important to you by accepting these type of treatments. And there are many doctors who refuse to treat kids like this. They tell their parents, you got to wait until the kid is old enough to make his own decision, like, you know, the age of consent. Not, you know, I'm talking about the age of consent for like minors, emancipated minors versus adults. So if the kid is still a child living with his parents, the child can't decide for himself to undergo these treatments, and the parent cannot decide for the kid to start these treatments. So a lot of doctors will say, you come back after you're an adult and, you know, you're 18 years old and you really want to, you know, think about what you want to do, basically. But there are plenty of other doctors who will go along with this desire of the child, and they will treat them with hormones and these therapies. And to me, that's the most disappointing thing.
There is another thing. In a follow-up study, after they treated the kids with this cross-sex hormones, 70 candidates were examined. They received this puberty suppression. DeVries and colleagues documented that all subjects eventually embraced a transgender identity and requested cross-sex hormones. In other words, this is a cause for concern. Normally, 80% to 95% of prepubertal youth with the gender dysphoria do not persist in their gender dysphoria as they grow older. But to have 100% of the prepubertal children choose cross-sex hormones suggests that the protocol itself inevitably leads the individual to identify as transgender. So they start from a young age, the child feels like that, they start the hormone treatment, and later on, guess what? All of them are transgender. Because even the hormonal treatment itself affects their development. They affect their brain. So the fact that 100%, that's a very alarming thing to say that this is a safe protocol. I agree with the pediatrician here. We do not have much more time. There are so many things here in this article and all over the internet. There is another 30-year follow-up study, and I want you to comment on this one. A 30-year follow-up study. In other words, they did the treatment and a 30-year follow-up. A study of post-operative transgender patients from Sweden found that the rate of suicide among post-operative transgender adults was nearly 20 times greater than that of the general population. To be clear, this does not prove that sex reassignment caused an increased risk of suicide or other psychological morbidities. Rather, it indicates that sex reassignment alone does not provide the individual with a level of mental health on par with the general population. The authors summarize their findings as follows. Persons with transsexualism after sex reassignment have considerably higher risk for mortality, suicidal behavior, psychiatric morbidity than the general population. Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, though alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this. So even sex reassignment surgeries are not a solution for this problem. They try to patch it. They do these things, the hormonal sex change surgeries, but the result is not what they thought. These people are still at a higher risk for health problems. And if, even the twin studies show there is no biological basis for the idea that I was born this way. They should be more, but you're not going to see this on media. I guarantee you that these articles are there on the internet. There are many of them, many studies. You'll never hear them on the media. The media, who is predominantly left-oriented, will not talk about this. They will only present the other side of the story, and that's where the ideology and the politics come into place. It's sexual politics that we're talking here. So I'm going to give you the last word, and we're going to close.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that that even these studies show that this type of sexual change treatments are not fixing the problem. It should kind of be evidence to consider this is not the type of treatment that should have been done in the first place. First and foremost, these people are confused. They are confused about their own identity, not talking necessarily about a sexual identity, but on a biological level, from a basic level, they are confused. They have not been affirmed. Their self-esteem has not been encouraged properly during development, in their early childhood. There are many factors that are involved in a person deciding that they are born the wrong gender, the wrong sex. And if we were to identify these and fix them in childhood, we wouldn't have this problem, and you would need to have sex reassignment surgeries. And it's true, they are susceptible to other mental health issues after that. Depression, of course, is one of the biggest things. Alcoholism, I already mentioned. And being bombarded daily by the media that it's cool or it's hip, it's trendy. society changes its values based on the things that we see on a daily basis. The more we see it, the more we normalize it. And if you look now, there's transgenders in sports. That's the next, I guess, debate. Do we allow women who are biologically men, but they've taken hormone treatment to be women? Do we allow them to compete with biological women on the track, on a sports team? Because there's on a genetic level, on a biological level, they're male. They have bigger bodies, they have stronger muscles, but they took hormones and they took, they did surgeries, whatever, to become female. But now they want to compete with real biological females. Is this fair? And they're already, you can read reports in the media about whether it's weightlifting, whether it's track and field. It's going to become an issue even in the next Summer Olympics. I can tell you in advance. There will be transgenders taking part in the Olympics, competing as a different sex than they're born. And by allowing it, we basically legitimize it. We say that for a female to take these hormones, they really are hormones, she's not breaking the drug rules, right? Very strict drug rules in competitive sports, but she's actively taking these hormones to become something different. All of that we throw out the window, and we discard the limitations of the biological women by putting this guy in with them.
Yeah, and there'll be people who will contest the results and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. But by not addressing the issue when we should have, by not putting a stop to it when we should have, this is the progression of things. And it's not even the end result. The end result is going to be much worse. But you will have normal people like you and me who shake our heads in disbelief. It's like, how did we get here? How did we get here? Right. By not doing what we should have done when we had the chance.
Thank you, Andre. It's really time to close. I hope, and this is my hope for the 2018, that indeed the science will save us. We all, the majority of the society, will be more active into calling into question these ideologies for the good of the species. Sexual satisfaction or looking for all kind of novelties and sexual fantasies, while they cannot be forced out of people's mind, they have to be kept in the bedroom. They should not be allowed in legislation, in curricula. And if we want to prosper health from the health point of view as a nation, we have to promote healthy habits and a healthy ideology of what it means to be a man and a woman, and that cannot be separated from the biologic aspect from our sex. And I wish you all, our viewers, a very prosperous 2018. We hope to see you again. If not, we'll continue to at least post articles to highlight the latest developments and news from the science realm, trying to make the public aware of the situation and to have the public be well aware of the issues to have an informed consent, an informed opinion. I'm apologizing for my English. It's not very good. Even my son is not a born English speaker. He speaks a lot better. I speak a lot worse. We have also this kind of talks in Romanian, And we'll continue on both languages for our friends. Thank you for now. Have a blessed 2018.